If you start feeling a little strange tonight, Dad, don't worry. That means it's working. My son Alan smiled as he tilted a small amber bottle over my water and counted 11 drops. I watched each one disappear into the glass. What is it? I asked. Heavy metal detox, he said. Lauren and I have been taking it for weeks. Better sleep, clearer thinking, less inflammation. You should try it. I was 73, a retired structural engineer who had spent 46 years finding weaknesses before buildings failed. But sitting at my son's Thanksgiving table, I had no reason to believe the danger I should be watching was standing 3 feet away from me. Alan handed me the glass. I drank. Before I tell you what happened after those 11 drops, subscribe to Calm Dad Stories and tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. Thanksgiving had started normally. Turkey roasting, football playing quietly, Lauren preparing side dishes while Alan opened wine. In fact, they were unusually attentive. Lauren had made stuffing from my late wife's recipe. Alan asked about my old engineering projects and carried my coat without being asked. After several difficult years between my children, I was grateful for a peaceful evening. My daughter Erin wasn't there. She was 29, practicing law in Philadelphia, and she and Alan had barely spoken for 5 years. Neither had ever explained the whole story. Erin only told me, "Dad, sometimes distance is healthier." Alan called her dramatic. I'd stopped trying to force them together. That evening, I simply wanted to enjoy being with my son. Halfway through dinner, Alan asked, "You ever think about selling the house?" "Not seriously. It's a lot of property for one person. I've managed it for 32 years. Lauren smiled. "He's just worried about you, Todd." A few minutes later, Alan asked whether I'd updated my estate documents, then whether I still managed my investments myself. I finally put down my fork. "Is this Thanksgiving or a financial consultation?" Alan laughed. "Sorry. Occupational hazard." He worked in financial consulting, so the questions weren't completely unusual. I let it go. After dinner, he glanced at my nearly empty water glass. "How do you feel?" "About what?" "The detox." "Exactly the same. Give it time." I finished the water. There was only a faint bitterness to it. When Alan thought I wasn't watching, he picked up the amber bottle and slipped it into a kitchen drawer. "Why hide the miracle cure?" I joked. His hand paused. "Lauren hates clutter." "I do," she said immediately. We laughed, but something about that tiny pause stayed with me. Later, Alan showed me renovations upstairs and talked about his consulting business. He mentioned several investments that hadn't performed well, then quickly added, "Nothing serious." By the time we returned downstairs, I noticed a strange heaviness behind my eyes. I checked the clock. 8:17. I should head home. Alan's reaction was immediate. "Stay another hour. It's already getting late. Then stay here tonight." I looked at him. "Since when do you worry about me driving 40 minutes? He smiled, but it looked forced. "Since you turned 73. Lauren studied my face. "You do look tired, Todd." I hadn't been tired when I arrived. Now my mouth felt unusually dry. I reached for my coffee and missed the handle on the first attempt. Alan noticed. "Dad, I'm fine." But when I tried to continue the conversation, the sentence disappeared from my mind halfway through. For several seconds, I couldn't remember what I'd intended to say. That had never happened to me before. I stood slowly. "I'm going to get some water." Alan started to rise. "I'll get it. I can manage a glass of water." I smiled and walked toward the kitchen. My legs felt slightly heavier than they should have. Behind me, Alan whispered something to Lauren. I couldn't hear the words. I kept walking, telling myself I was tired, that I'd eaten too much, that there were a dozen ordinary explanations. He was my son. I wasn't going to accuse him because of one strange evening. But as I reached the kitchen, I found myself thinking about the amber bottle Alan had hidden in the drawer, then about his questions concerning my house and estate, and finally about the 11 drops he'd watched me swallow so carefully. For the first time that night, one thought entered my mind that I desperately wanted to dismiss. What exactly had my son put in my glass? The kitchen felt cooler than the dining room, and for a moment I was grateful for it. I filled a glass from the faucet and drank slowly, waiting for the heaviness behind my eyes to disappear. It didn't. My mouth remained dry, and that faint, bitter taste had changed into something metallic at the back of my tongue. I put the glass down and gripped the counter. "Too much food," I whispered. "That's all." I wanted an ordinary explanation. At 73, dizziness wasn't evidence of anything sinister. But I had arrived feeling perfectly well, and the symptoms had started less than 2 hours after Alan counted 11 drops into my water. I reached for a napkin beside the sink and accidentally knocked it onto the floor. When I bent down, the room shifted slightly. I waited for my balance to return, then reached between the cabinet and trash bin where the napkin had fallen. That was when I saw something else wedged deep in the narrow gap, a torn silver blister pack. At first, I assumed someone in the house was taking medication and had dropped it. I pulled it into the light. Most of the tablets were gone. One word remained clearly printed across the foil: Scopolamine. The name meant nothing to me. My first thought wasn't poison, it was concern. Maybe Alan had a condition he hadn't told me about. Maybe Lauren did. Even Keith had mentioned problems with dizziness months earlier. I took out my phone and typed the name into the search bar. The first results made me stop breathing for a second. Scopolamine could cause dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, confusion, and memory problems. In older adults, stronger exposure could produce severe disorientation and short-term memory loss. I read another medical summary, then another. The words changed, but the pattern didn't. Confusion, memory impairment, disorientation. I looked toward the dining room. Alan was laughing at something Keith had said. Lauren was clearing plates. Everything sounded completely normal. Then I looked at my shaking hand. Dry mouth, metallic taste, poor balance. Losing my sentence halfway through, the engineer in me began arranging facts I didn't want arranged. Alan had introduced a supplement I'd never requested. Lauren already had my glass prepared. Alan had personally counted 11 drops. Afterward, he'd repeatedly asked how I felt, and when I tried to leave, both of them encouraged me to stay. Now, a blister pack for a drug associated with confusion and memory loss was hidden beside their trash can. "No," I whispered. There had to be another explanation. Finding medication in someone's kitchen didn't prove it had been put in my drink. I needed evidence, not fear. So I folded the blister pack carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. Then I splashed cold water on my face and studied myself in the dark reflection of the kitchen window. My eyes looked normal. I still knew exactly where I was. I knew the date, the street, the make of the car parked outside. Whatever was happening, my mind was still working. I needed to keep it that way long enough to get home. When I returned to the dining room, Lauren looked up immediately. "Feeling better?" "Much." Alan studied me. "You sure?" "Absolutely. Probably the wine." I deliberately reached for another spoonful of cranberry relish. If either of them expected panic, I wasn't going to give it to them. For the next 20 minutes, I behaved normally. I laughed when Keith finished his story. I complimented Lauren's dinner. I asked Alan about work. But now I watched them, instead of listening to them. Twice, Alan glanced at Lauren after asking me a question. Once, when I paused before remembering the name of a restaurant, Lauren's eyes moved straight to him. A small look passed between them. I might have ignored it 3 hours earlier. I couldn't anymore. At the door, Alan helped me into my coat. "Wait, Dad. Almost forgot." He disappeared into the kitchen and returned, holding 2 unopened amber bottles identical to the one he'd used earlier. He placed them in my hands. "Take 11 drops every day. Give it 2 weeks and you'll notice a difference." I looked down at the bottles. Both seals were intact. "Every day? Every morning? And you're sure it's safe?" Alan smiled. "Would I give it to you if it wasn't?" For one dangerous second, I nearly asked him about the blister pack in my pocket. Instead, I smiled back. "Of course not." I thanked Lauren for dinner, said goodbye to Keith, and walked to my Volvo carrying both bottles. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat without starting the engine. The 2 bottles rested on the passenger seat. The blister pack felt heavy against my chest. I still wasn't ready to believe my son had poisoned me. Believing that required more than a frightening coincidence and an internet search, it required proof. I started the car and drove toward South End, concentrating on every turn. When I finally reached my brownstone, I placed the 2 sealed bottles beside the blister pack on my kitchen table. I stared at all 3 objects for nearly an hour. Then I picked up my phone. There was only one person in my family I trusted to look at what I'd found without emotion and tell me whether I was imagining a conspiracy or standing in the middle of one. My daughter, Erin. At 11:47 that night, the 2 amber bottles were still sitting untouched beneath the light above my kitchen table. The torn scopolamine blister pack lay beside them. I had spent nearly 2 hours reading medical references, hoping to find one explanation that would make the pieces stop fitting together. I couldn't. Scopolamine wasn't a vitamin or some harmless ingredient normally found in a detox supplement. It was a powerful medication capable of causing exactly what I'd experienced at Alan's house: dry mouth, dizziness, confusion, and memory problems. Still, one fact kept me from accusing anyone. I didn't know what was actually inside those sealed bottles. I needed certainty. So I called Erin. My daughter lived in Philadelphia, where she worked as an attorney. She and Alan hadn't spoken properly in 5 years, and I had spent most of that time refusing to choose sides. Calling her now about her brother felt like crossing a line. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, it's almost midnight. What's wrong?" "I need you to listen until I'm finished." Her voice changed immediately. "Okay." I told her everything. Thanksgiving dinner, Alan's 11 drops, his questions about my house and estate, the sudden dry mouth and confusion, the blister pack beside the trash, the 2 sealed bottles he had insisted I take every morning. Erin didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the line remained silent. "Erin, I'm here." Her voice had become colder, more precise. "Don't open those bottles." "I haven't." "Are the seals intact?" "Yes." "And you still have the blister pack?" "Right in front of me." I heard her typing. "Good. We need both bottles tested by an independent toxicology lab." The word "we" caught me. For the first time since leaving Alan's house, I didn't feel completely alone. "You think you put something in them?" I asked. "I think we don't guess. We prove." That sounded like Erin. She asked me to photograph everything exactly where it was, then place each item separately into clean bags without altering the seals. She would arrange the laboratory contact from Philadelphia. "Dad, until we know what those bottles contain, don't call Alan. Don't mention the blister pack. And if he asks whether you're taking the drops, don't give him any reason to think you're suspicious." "You sound like you already believe this is deliberate." Erin paused. "I believe your symptoms matter. I believe finding scopolamine in that kitchen matters. And I believe Alan asking about your assets on the same night matters. But belief isn't evidence." I looked at the bottles. There could still be an innocent explanation. "Yes," she said. "And if there is, the lab will give us one." The next morning, I packed the blister pack and both bottles exactly as Erin instructed and sent them to the laboratory she'd arranged. Then I went home and tried to behave like an ordinary 73-year-old man having an ordinary weekend. It was impossible. Every memory from Thanksgiving now looked different. Alan watching me finish the glass. Lauren asking whether I felt tired. Their glance when I briefly forgot what I was saying. Even his insistence that I stay longer. Were they worried about me or waiting for something? Sunday afternoon, Alan called. I stared at his name before answering. "Hey, Dad," checking in. "How are you feeling?" "Fine." "Any difference from the detox?" I remembered Erin's warning. "Hard to tell after 1 dose. Keep taking it. 11 drops every morning." His tone was warm, almost caring. That was what made the conversation so difficult. I wanted to hear my son. Instead, I heard a man checking whether instructions had been followed. "I will," I said. "Good. Give it a couple weeks." After we hung up, I wrote down the exact time and everything he'd said. Erin had told me to document anything unusual. So I started a notebook. Calls, questions, symptoms, dates. For 31 years as a structural engineer, I'd learned that when something failed, memory was never enough. You documented the sequence. 4 days after Thanksgiving, I was sitting in my living room pretending to read when my phone rang at 10:12 in the morning. Erin. I answered immediately. There was no greeting. Dad, the laboratory results are back. Something in her voice made me put the book down. Already? I expedited them. And? She took one breath. Before I tell you, I need you to stay calm. I looked toward the empty kitchen where those bottles had been sitting only days earlier. Just tell me. Erin went silent for half a second. Then she said the sentence that destroyed the last innocent explanation I had left. Both bottles tested positive. Both bottles tested positive for scopolamine, Erin said. I didn't answer. I was sitting in the same chair where I'd spent the weekend convincing myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Now that explanation was gone. How much? I finally asked. Erin knew why I wanted a number. Engineers trust measurements more than adjectives. Enough that the toxicologist flagged it immediately. The concentration is significantly above anything you'd expect from legitimate therapeutic use. She paused. Dad, his written conclusion says the contents are consistent with intentional poisoning. I stared through the window at Rutland Square. Cars moved past. A woman walked a dog. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck backed up with its warning signal beeping. Boston continued having an ordinary Tuesday while my understanding of my own family collapsed. Both sealed bottles? Both. No possibility they were contaminated after I received them? The seals were intact when you sent them. The lab documented everything. I closed my eyes. Alan hadn't handed me one suspicious bottle by accident. He had given me 2 sealed bottles and instructed me to take 11 drops every morning. What would repeated doses do? I asked. Erin became quiet. The toxicologist specifically evaluated that because of your age. Repeated exposure could produce worsening confusion, memory gaps, disorientation, and impaired coordination. For how long? Long enough to look like something else. I understood before she finished. Dementia. Yes. The word landed harder than poisoning. Poisoning meant someone wanted to make me sick. This suggested someone wanted other people to watch me become sick. I thought back to Thanksgiving. Alan repeatedly asking how I felt. Lauren watching when I missed the coffee handle. The glance they exchanged after I lost my sentence. Suddenly those moments weren't random anymore. They looked like observations. They weren't just waiting for the drug to affect me, I said. They were watching the symptoms. Erin didn't disagree. I stood and walked toward the kitchen because sitting still had become impossible. Why? That's what we need to establish. If they wanted money, Alan could ask me for money. Don't assume motive yet. He asked about my house, my estate documents, and my investments at dinner. I know, her voice softened slightly. That's why I started checking something before the laboratory results came back. I stopped walking. Checking what? Your property records. Why? Because if someone is deliberately creating cognitive symptoms in a 73-year-old man, the obvious question is, what becomes possible if that man is declared unable to manage his own affairs? A cold sensation moved through me that had nothing to do with the December weather. Erin, what did you find? I need another day before I give you conclusions. But someone requested a certified valuation and title search on the Rutland Square property in October. Who? The request came through a law office in Brookline. Do I know them? Not that I can tell. She paused. The attorney's name is Richard Crane. I'd never heard it. What kind of lawyer? Another pause, longer this time. Guardianship and conservatorship work. I gripped the back of a kitchen chair. The architecture was beginning to appear. Drug, an older man. Create confusion. Let family members witness it. Then bring in a lawyer whose work involved taking legal control when someone could no longer manage his own affairs. You think Alan is trying to have me declared incompetent? I think we have evidence you were deliberately exposed to scopolamine, and we have an unexplained asset search connected to a guardianship attorney. That's what we know. We don't jump beyond the evidence. Even now, she was protecting me from my own conclusions. What do I do? Nothing different. Nothing? Call Alan if you normally call him. Answer if he calls you. Do not confront him. And under no circumstances tell him those bottles were tested. He called Sunday, asking whether I was taking them. Erin went silent. Did you tell him yes? I told him I'd keep taking them. Good. Keep that story. Hearing my daughter tell me to deceive my son should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt necessary. There's something else, she said. I want you evaluated by an independent neurological specialist immediately. Full cognitive assessment, documented and court admissible. You think they'll move soon? If this is what it looks like, I don't want them creating the first medical record. I want us there first. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. My mind was clear. Yet only days earlier, 11 drops had been enough to make me lose a sentence in my own son's dining room. Arrange it. I already started. That was Erin. 5 years away from her brother, hadn't made her hesitate for even 5 minutes when I needed her. Before hanging up, she said, Dad, one more thing. Until we understand the financial side, assume Thanksgiving wasn't the beginning. It may only have been the first part you noticed. After the call ended, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence beneath Alan's Sunday call. The bottles were poisoned on purpose. Then beneath it I wrote another. Why does a guardianship lawyer want information about my house? I didn't know the answer yet, but Erin did know where to look. And what she found next would show me that Alan hadn't been planning merely to make his father look confused. Someone had already calculated exactly what my confusion could be worth. Erin called me the following afternoon. Dad, I found the rest of it. There was no hesitation in her voice this time. Richard Crane isn't just a guardianship attorney. He specializes in cases involving elderly clients with substantial assets. I sat down at my kitchen table. What does that have to do with Alan? Everything. Erin explained that the October title search hadn't stopped with my brownstone. Someone had requested information on my investment accounts, retirement holdings, and other real estate interests. They weren't checking one property, she said. They were mapping your entire estate. I opened the notebook in front of me. How much do they think I'm worth? Conservatively, more than $4 million. I already knew the approximate number, but hearing my daughter say it in this context made it sound obscene. 31 years of engineering, disciplined saving, careful investments, and a Boston property purchased before prices became absurd. I'd never thought of it as $4 million. I'd thought of it as my home, my retirement, and something eventually left to my children. There's more, Erin said. A colleague in probate law helped me trace Crane's recent work. He prepared a guardianship and financial conservatorship petition involving you. My hand stopped over the notebook. Prepared? Drafted. Not filed yet. Who requested it? Silence. Alan. I closed my eyes. Somehow the laboratory report hadn't prepared me for hearing my son's name attached to a legal document designed to take control of my life. What does the petition say? That you've shown increasing confusion, memory problems, impaired judgment, and difficulty managing financial affairs? I almost laughed. Based on what? That's the point. Most of the supporting documentation isn't there yet. The petition is structured to receive medical records and witness statements once your condition becomes serious enough. 11 drops every morning. Suddenly the dosage had a schedule, and the schedule had a purpose. They poisoned me until I looked confused, I said. Then they document it. That's what the evidence is beginning to indicate. And if a judge accepts it, a guardian could be appointed for personal decisions and a conservator for financial affairs. Who? Erin hesitated. I already knew. Alan. He's named as the proposed primary financial conservator. I looked around the kitchen I'd renovated 20 years earlier. My house, my accounts, my investments, my decisions. Alan wasn't planning to steal money from a drawer. He was preparing to make the law hand him the keys. So that's why he kept asking whether I was taking the drops. Probably. They needed deterioration they could point to. They? Erin went quiet again. Dad, Alan didn't sign the supporting declaration alone. My stomach tightened. Lauren? She's involved in the documentation, but there's another family signature. I waited. Keith. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. My brother? Keith Moore signed as a supporting family witness. I stood and walked to the window. Keith had sat across from me on Thanksgiving with a scotch in his hand, telling jokes while Alan watched poison take effect. He had moved into Alan's house in September after his divorce. At the time, I'd thought my son was helping his uncle through a difficult period. Now September looked very different. Keith knew. His signature says he was willing to support the claim that you were declining. He watched me at dinner. Yes, I remembered him laughing while my mouth dried out and my balance shifted. 3 people in that house had known what was happening while I complimented the turkey. Why would Keith do this? I looked into his finances. Erin's tone became careful. The divorce hit him hard. He's carrying significant debt. I'm still tracing everything, but his financial position gives him a motive to cooperate. I sat back down. They bought him. We don't know what was promised yet. He sold me anyway. Erin let the silence remain. Then she told me about Crane. 3 previous guardianship matters had raised concerns about irregular procedures. His pattern was remarkably consistent. Identify an older person with valuable assets, build a record suggesting incapacity, then move quickly once a medical incident gave the family justification to file. Alan didn't invent this, Erin said. Someone taught him how to structure it. I stared at the Thanksgiving notes in front of me. Crane. That's where the evidence points. The betrayal changed shape again. My son hadn't panicked and made one desperate decision. He had found professional help. He had arranged an asset search in October. He had prepared legal paperwork before Thanksgiving. He had brought Keith into it. Then he'd sat across from me and counted 11 drops into my glass. How long? I asked. The earliest paperwork I found is mid-October. 6 weeks. At least 6 weeks of planning before Alan called and casually asked whether I was coming for Thanksgiving. I remembered the cranberry relish, Lauren's hug at the door, Alan remembering I'd once mentioned feeling tired. None of it felt accidental anymore. Dad? Erin said. I'm here. I need you to hear me carefully. You cannot confront them. I understand. Not Alan. Not Lauren. Especially not Keith. As far as they know, you're taking those drops every morning, and nothing has changed. I looked at my notebook. My anger had disappeared. What replaced it was colder and much more useful. Then we let them keep believing that. Erin paused. Exactly. What's our first move? We prove the one thing their entire plan depends on being false. That I'm losing my mind. Yes. I'm coming to Boston tomorrow night. Thursday morning, you're undergoing a complete independent cognitive evaluation with Dr. William Hart in Framingham. He's testified in elder abuse cases before. His report will be admissible in court. And after that? After that, we stop defending ourselves and start building our own case. When the call ended, I remained at the table, staring at the number I'd written across the top of a blank page. $4 million plus. For 31 years, I'd built that estate piece by piece so my family would someday be secure. Alan had looked at the same lifetime of work and reached a different conclusion. To him, apparently, his father wasn't a man to protect. I was an asset he needed, declared incompetent before he could take possession of it. Erin arrived at my brownstone shortly after 9 the next evening, carrying 1 suitcase and a leather briefcase. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. She hugged me at the door, then held me at arm's length and studied my face. Any symptoms since Thanksgiving? None. Good. Let's keep it that way. Within 10 minutes, my dining table looked more like a law office than a place where I'd eaten breakfast that morning. Erin laid out copies of the toxicology report, Richard Crane's records, the property searches, and the draft guardianship documents. Seeing everything together made the conspiracy harder to deny. At the center of it was one assumption, that by the time Alan filed those papers, I would look too confused to defend myself. Erin tapped the guardianship petition. Their case needs evidence that you're declining. We take that away first. At 8 the next morning, we drove to Framingham to meet Dr. William Hart, a neurologist who had evaluated older adults in guardianship disputes for more than 20 years. Erin waited outside while he examined me. He began with ordinary questions, date, location, recent events, then moved into memory exercises, pattern recognition, calculations, spatial reasoning, and delayed recall. Some tests felt almost insulting at first. Then I understood why they mattered. This wasn't about proving to myself that I was intelligent. It was about creating an independent record before Alan could manufacture a different one. Nearly 3 hours later, Dr. Hart put down his pen. Mr. Moore, have you noticed any persistent memory problems outside the Thanksgiving episode? No. Difficulty paying bills? No. Getting lost? Never. Problems managing medication or appointments? No, he nodded. And you're still personally managing your investments? Every week, he smiled slightly. I suspected that. Erin joined us after the examination. Dr. Hart reviewed his preliminary findings. My memory, executive function, reasoning, and orientation were all within healthy ranges for my age. In several categories, I had performed considerably above average. I see no clinical evidence of dementia or cognitive incapacity, he said. Erin asked the question that mattered most. Would you put that in a formal report? Absolutely. And would you testify to it if necessary? Yes. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Alan could call me forgetful. Keith could sign statements. Richard Crane could draft whatever petition he wanted. But now there would be a medical record created before any supposed decline one they hadn't controlled. On the drive home, Erin finally smiled. You scored better than most people 15 years younger. Don't sound so surprised. I'm your lawyer today. I'm required to remain objective. You're also my daughter. Then I'm extremely unsurprised. It was the first time either of us had laughed since her arrival. Back at the house, the mood changed quickly. Erin opened her laptop. Now we protect the legal side. She explained that Dr. Hart's report could establish a baseline of competence. She also wanted my estate attorney to document that I remained capable of making independent financial and legal decisions. If Crane suddenly files a petition claiming rapid decline, we'll already have contradictory evidence dated before his filing, and the poisoning, separate track. We preserve the toxicology evidence and give investigators room to work. I looked at her. You've already contacted someone. I spoke preliminarily with an elder abuse investigator. No accusations beyond what we can prove. She slid the laboratory report toward me. But this is enough to make them listen. My phone rang. Alan. Erin and I looked at each other. Answer it, she said. I put the call on speaker. Hey, Dad. How's the detox going? Pretty well. Taking 11 drops every morning? I glanced at Erin. She nodded. Every morning? Alan sounded pleased. Any fogginess? Forgetting little things? The question was too specific now that I knew what he wanted. Maybe a little. Yesterday I couldn't remember where I put my glasses. They had been in my pocket. Erin wrote something on a legal pad. That's normal, Alan said quickly. Your body is adjusting. Keep going. If you say so, trust me, Dad. I almost laughed at those two words. I do. After we hung up, Erin wrote down the time. He just encouraged you to continue taking a substance laboratory testing, says contains scopolamine, and asked whether I'm becoming forgetful. Exactly. She closed the notebook. Let him keep talking. That evening, Doctor. Hart emailed his preliminary report. Erin printed it and placed it beside Crane's draft petition. On one side was a document describing an elderly man supposedly losing control of his mind. On the other was an independent medical evaluation stating that same man was fully competent and performing above his age group. I looked at the 2 pages and finally understood the advantage we had. Alan still believed the poison was working. He believed I was slowly becoming easier to control. He had no idea Erin was in Boston, no idea the bottles had been tested, and no idea the medical foundation of his guardianship plan had already been destroyed. For the first time since Thanksgiving, my son wasn't setting the timetable anymore. We were. For the next 9 days, Alan believed his plan was working. Every morning, at exactly 8, I poured 11 drops of plain water into an empty glass, then wrote in my notebook that I had taken the detox. The real bottles remained sealed as evidence. Every few days, Alan called to check on me, and each time I gave him exactly what he wanted to hear. A little foggy this morning. Forgot why I walked into the basement yesterday. Couldn't remember a neighbor's name for a minute. Nothing dramatic. Erin warned me that too much decline might make them act before we were ready. We needed Alan confident, not alarmed. While I played the confused father, Erin worked from my dining room table. Dr. Hart finalized his report stating that I showed no evidence of dementia or cognitive incapacity. My estate attorney added an independent statement confirming that I understood my property, accounts, obligations, and legal decisions. Erin then filed protective documentation establishing my competency before Richard Crane could submit his guardianship petition. If they claim you're suddenly incapable, she explained, they'll have to explain how a man independently evaluated days earlier was functioning above the normal range for his age. But she didn't stop there. The toxicology report, the scopolamine blister pack, the sealed bottles, and my notes documenting Alan's calls were transferred through proper channels to an elder abuse investigator. Erin also gave investigators the dates of Alan's repeated instructions to continue taking 11 drops every morning. From this point forward, she told me, don't collect evidence by doing anything unusual. Just live normally and document what comes to you. That suited me. I wasn't interested in becoming a detective. I wanted professionals between my anger and whatever happened next. Erin also contacted the compliance department at the financial firm where Alan worked. She didn't accuse him of crimes they couldn't prove. She provided documentation showing that an employee who advised clients about money was connected to an undisclosed effort to gain control of an elderly relative's multi-million-dollar estate. 2 days later, Alan was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. He called me that evening. Dad, something weird happened at work. I kept my voice concerned. What happened? Some anonymous complaint? Probably nothing. About what? Compliance stuff. He paused. You haven't talked to Erin recently, have you? Across the room, Erin looked up from her laptop. Not recently, I said. Technically, we'd spoken 3 minutes earlier. Why? No reason. She's always hated me. You two should fix that someday. Alan gave a humorless laugh. Maybe. Then his tone changed. How are you feeling? There it was again. Actually, I misplaced my checkbook this morning. Really? The sudden interest in his voice was unmistakable. Found it eventually. Dad, maybe I should start helping with the bills. I looked directly at Erin. She wrote 2 words on her pad. Let him talk. Maybe, I said. I've been thinking the house is getting harder to manage too. Alan went silent for half a second. We should talk about that. After the holidays. Why wait? I'm tired tonight. Sure. Rest. Keep taking the drops. When the call ended, Erin stared at the phone. He's accelerating. Because he thinks I'm declining. And because his job is suddenly unstable. If money was already driving this, administrative leave may increase the pressure. That night, she showed me another development. Investigators had begun examining Richard Crane's involvement and the origin of the property searches. We still didn't know how much Crane understood about the poisoning, so Erin refused to speculate. But the legal route Alan expected to use was becoming dangerous for him without his knowledge. We could confront them now, I said. We could, Erin replied. But then Alan denies everything. Lauren says the bottles weren't hers. Keith claims he signed papers he didn't understand. And Crane says he was merely preparing documents based on information supplied by a client. So we need them together, and we need them to believe they're still in control. That gave us the next move. On December 15, Alan called again. This time I deliberately let the phone ring several times before answering. Dad, you okay? Yes. Sorry. Couldn't find the phone. Erin sat across from me, listening. I've been thinking about what you said, I continued. About getting help with the house and finances. Alan became very quiet. Okay. Maybe we should sit down as a family. There are accounts, property documents, things I probably should organize before I start forgetting more. His answer came too quickly. Absolutely. Tomorrow evening? Come here. Lauren can make dinner. Maybe Keith should be there too. Another pause. Good idea. I looked at Erin. She nodded once. 6 o'clock? Alan asked. 6 is fine. Bring whatever financial papers you think are important. I'll try to remember. He laughed softly. Don't worry, Dad. We'll take care of everything. After we hung up, Erin closed her laptop. For nearly 3 weeks, Alan had been waiting for Scopolamine to turn me into the father described in his guardianship paperwork. Now I had finally given him that father. Confused, worried, ready to surrender control. The meeting was set for December 16 at Alan's house, the same house where the first 11 drops had gone into my glass. Alan thought I was coming there to hand him my finances. He had no idea I was coming to let him reveal exactly what he intended to do with them. At 5:42 on December 16, I parked 2 houses away from Alan's home and sat behind the wheel with both hands resting on my knees. 23 days had passed since Thanksgiving. The last time I'd entered that house, I had trusted my son enough to drink whatever he put in front of me. Tonight, Alan believed those 11 daily drops had turned me into exactly the man he needed. Confused, frightened, and ready to surrender control. My phone buzzed. A message from Erin. "We're ready. Don't rush them. Let them talk." I deleted it, placed the phone in my pocket, and drove the remaining distance. Alan opened the door before I reached the bell. "Dad, come in." He was unusually cheerful. Lauren hugged me, and Keith was already sitting in the living room with a glass of scotch. Seeing my brother there hurt differently now. I remembered him sitting at the Thanksgiving table watching the drug take effect. Tonight I smiled anyway. "Good to see everyone." I deliberately carried an old accordion folder containing harmless bank statements, utility bills, and property records. Alan's eyes went straight to it. "You brought the paperwork?" "Most of it, I think." I frowned as though uncertain. I couldn't remember where I put some things. Lauren and Keith exchanged a quick glance. Alan touched my shoulder. "That's okay, Dad. We'll sort it out. We ate first." I refused wine and drank only from a sealed bottle of water I'd brought with me. Alan noticed. "No detox tonight?" "Already took it this morning. 11 drops?" "I think so." I let the uncertainty linger. Maybe 10. I've been forgetting little things. Alan leaned back, and something in his face relaxed. After dinner, he moved us into the living room and placed my folder on the coffee table. "You said you wanted help managing things. The house feels like too much lately." "That's understandable. And the investments." I rubbed my forehead. "I don't want to make a mistake." Lauren sat beside Alan. "That's why family is here, Todd." Keith nodded. "You shouldn't have to handle everything alone." I looked at my brother. "You really think I'm having trouble?" His eyes dropped briefly. "We've all noticed things." There it was. What things? Keith glanced at Alan before answering. "Forgetting conversations, getting confused, losing track of details. None of those things had happened before Thanksgiving. Have I?" I asked quietly. Alan stepped in. "Dad, nobody's judging you. Aging happens." He opened my folder and began sorting through the papers. "What matters is putting something in place before there's an emergency." "Something?" "Just a structure so I can help with the accounts and property." "Like power of attorney?" Alan and Lauren exchanged another glance. "Something along those lines," he said. "Richard can explain it better." I pretended not to recognize the name. "Richard?" "An attorney I've spoken with. He handles situations like this." My pulse remained steady. Alan had just connected himself directly to Crane without being asked. "Situations like what?" He softened his voice. "When a parent starts needing assistance." I looked toward Keith. "And you're comfortable with this?" "Alan's trying to protect you." "From what?" Keith hesitated. "From making decisions you might regret." I let several seconds pass. "Maybe you're right." Alan leaned forward immediately. "That's why we should start now." He pulled a document from a folder beneath the coffee table. It wasn't one of mine. "This is preliminary. Nothing happens tonight. It simply allows us to begin organizing things." I didn't reach for it. "What happens to my house?" "Nothing. You keep living there." "And my accounts?" "I help manage them." "Can I still make decisions?" Alan's patience thinned slightly. "Dad, the whole point is that you wouldn't have to worry about every decision anymore." There it was, the destination behind the 11 drops. Not help, control. I leaned back and looked from my son to Lauren and finally to Keith. "All 3 of you think I can't manage my own life?" Lauren answered gently. "We think you're getting worse." "How quickly?" Alan frowned. "What? When did you first notice?" Nobody answered. I continued. "Before Thanksgiving or after?" The room changed. Alan stopped smiling. "Why does that matter?" "I'm trying to remember." I tapped my temple and gave him the confused expression he'd been waiting weeks to see. His shoulders relaxed again. Don't strain yourself. He pushed the document toward me and placed a pen beside it. We can take care of the difficult parts. I looked at the pen but didn't touch it. And Richard Crane thinks this is necessary? Alan froze for a fraction of a second. I told you his name. Did you? I frowned again. See? That's exactly what I mean. I keep forgetting. Lauren released a breath. Keith stared at the floor. Alan recovered and slid the paper closer. Just read what you can. I reached toward it slowly. Then the doorbell rang. Nobody moved at first. Alan looked irritated. Are you expecting someone? Lauren shook her head. The bell rang again. Alan stood and walked toward the hallway. I remained seated, looking at the unsigned document in front of me. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open, then silence. Alan's voice came from the hallway. What are you doing here? I didn't need to turn around. I recognized the footsteps. Erin entered the living room carrying her leather briefcase. Lauren went pale. Keith stopped breathing for a moment. Alan stared at his sister as though he'd seen a ghost. Erin looked first at the document beside my hand, then at her brother. Hi, Alan. Who invited you? Erin placed her briefcase on the table. Dad did. Alan slowly turned toward me. The confused old man he'd been speaking to disappeared from my face. I sat upright and looked directly into his eyes. Erin opened her briefcase. Before Dad signs anything, she said, I think the three of you should see what we've been working on. Erin opened her briefcase and placed 3 folders on the coffee table. Alan remained standing. Lauren had gone pale, while Keith stared at me as if he were trying to understand when his confused older brother had disappeared. Erin opened the first folder. Let's start with Thanksgiving. She slid a laboratory report toward Alan. The 2 sealed detox bottles you gave Dad were independently tested. Both contained scopolamine at concentrations inconsistent with legitimate supplement use. Alan didn't touch the paper. I don't know anything about that. Dad preserved both seals and the laboratory-documented chain of custody. Lauren immediately looked at Alan. Erin opened the second folder. This is the guardianship and conservatorship petition prepared through Richard Crane's office. She turned several pages toward us. It claims Dad suffers progressive memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, and difficulty managing his finances. My eyes went to Keith's signature near the bottom. You signed that? Keith swallowed. Todd, Alan told me you were declining. Before or after Thanksgiving? He looked away. Erin opened the third folder. And this is Dr. William Hart's independent neurological evaluation. Dad shows no evidence of dementia or cognitive incapacity. His memory, reasoning, executive function, and orientation are all intact. Alan stared at me. You were pretending. After I discovered what was in those bottles, yes. His face hardened. You lied to me. You kept asking whether I was taking 11 drops every morning. I gave you the answer you wanted, Erin added. Those calls were documented too, including your questions about whether he was becoming foggy or forgetful. Alan turned toward her. Notes prove nothing. That's why we have the bottles. Toxicology results, asset searches, guardianship paperwork, and medical evaluation. Keith suddenly stood. Asset searches? Erin looked at him. Someone began mapping Dad's property and financial holdings in October. His estate exceeds $4 million. Keith slowly sat back down. Lauren looked at Alan. You told me Richard started looking into this after Thanksgiving. Alan snapped. Stop talking. That single sentence changed the room. I looked at my son. So, Thanksgiving wasn't the beginning, Dad. You're misunderstanding everything. Then explain it. I was worried about you. You had a guardianship lawyer researching my assets before I showed any symptoms, Alan said. Nothing. Then you gave me scopolamine, watched me become confused, and sent me home with enough to continue taking it every day. Nobody was trying to kill you. The room went silent. Erin's expression changed immediately. Nobody said you were. Alan realized what he'd done. That's not what I meant. I took out my phone. Detective Paulson, we're ready. Lauren stood. You called the police? The police already know. Alan moved toward me. Dad, don't do this. I didn't start this. A knock came at the door less than a minute later. Detective Ron Paulson entered with 2 officers. Erin handed him the evidence packet already prepared for investigators. Paulson told Alan, Lauren, and Keith that they needed to accompany the officers while the investigation continued. Alan's composure finally broke. "Dad, please. We can fix this without destroying the family." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" Paulson warned him not to answer without counsel, but Alan sank onto the sofa. "My business was failing. Nobody spoke. I borrowed money to keep it alive. Then I borrowed more to cover the first loans. I thought I could recover. How does poisoning me solve that?" He looked at the floor. "Your estate." There it was. "More than $4 million, I said. Alan nodded weakly. "You don't need all of it, Dad. Most of it just sits there." I stared at him. 31 years of engineering, saving, and investing had become, in my son's mind, unused money waiting for him. "So, you were going to have me declared incompetent?" Crane said the arrangement could be temporary. Once I had authority over the accounts, I could restructure things and repay everything later. "And the scopolamine?" His eyes filled. "We needed evidence that you were declining," Lauren whispered. "Alan, stop." He ignored her. "It wasn't supposed to permanently hurt you. Just confusion, memory problems, enough for doctors to see something." I felt something inside me go cold. "You poisoned your father to manufacture dementia." Alan covered his face. "I was desperate. You could have asked me for help. You would have said no." That was the answer I hadn't expected. So my right to say no was the problem. Alan looked at me but couldn't respond. Keith began crying quietly. "Todd, I didn't know about the drug. Alan told me you were already declining. He said signing would protect you. You sat at that table and watched me." Keith lowered his head. Detective Paulson ended the conversation and directed the officers to escort them outside. Lauren went first. Keith followed. Alan stopped beside me on his way to the door. I looked at the boy I'd once carried on my shoulders and barely recognized the man standing there. "Why, Alan?" His voice broke. "Because I was drowning, Dad, and I thought you had enough to save me. I might have helped if you'd asked." He looked up. "Then why wouldn't you now?" "Because asking for help gives me a choice. What you planned required taking that choice away." Alan lowered his eyes. The officer led him outside. Erin came to stand beside me as the police cars pulled away. Neither of us celebrated. 3 weeks earlier, I'd wanted proof that I wasn't imagining the betrayal. Now the proof covered an entire coffee table. I had protected my mind, my home, and more than $4 million. But standing in my son's empty living room, none of it felt like winning. 6 months after that night, I sat in the back row of a Boston courtroom and watched my son stand before a judge. By then, the investigation had uncovered enough to confirm that Thanksgiving had been only one stage of a much larger plan. The poison bottles, Alan's repeated instructions that I take 11 drops every morning, the guardianship paperwork, the asset searches, and the financial records all told the same story. Alan had been drowning in debt and believed my estate could rescue him. Lauren had participated in the plan, and Keith had supported the false claims about my mental decline. Richard Crane faced a separate investigation over his role in preparing the guardianship strategy. None of it felt satisfying. Alan eventually accepted responsibility and received 4 years in prison. Lauren received 3. Keith received 2.5. When the judge announced Alan's sentence, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle when he was 7. I remembered his first day of college and the phone call when he got his first real job. A courtroom can tell you what someone did. It cannot erase who that person used to be to you. Erin sat beside me and quietly took my hand. "You okay?" she whispered. "No." She nodded. "Me neither." That was enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but I walked past them. I didn't want Alan's downfall turned into my victory. There had been no winner. My son was going to prison, my brother had betrayed me, and a family that had once gathered around the same Thanksgiving table would probably never sit together again. What I did have was control of my own life. Erin and my estate attorney restructured everything so no future guardianship attempt could quietly threaten my property. My brownstone remained mine. My investments remained mine. More importantly, my decisions remained mine. I also changed my estate plan, not because I wanted to punish Alan, but because I had learned that money without boundaries could become something poisonous long before anyone put chemicals into a bottle. Erin never asked what she would inherit, not once. She helped because she wanted her father safe. That difference stayed with me. Alan wrote from prison 3 months into his sentence. The letter was 6 pages long. He apologized for frightening me, for the lies, and for convincing himself that desperation justified what he'd done. Near the end, he wrote, "I kept telling myself I wasn't stealing from you because someday the money would have been mine anyway." I read that sentence several times. Then I understood the mistake at the center of everything. Alan had begun treating my death as a financial event that simply hadn't happened yet. He stopped seeing my property as the life I'd built, and started seeing it as an inheritance being withheld from him. I eventually wrote back. I told him I loved him because he was my son. I also told him forgiveness would not erase accountability. If we ever rebuilt anything between us, it would happen slowly, without money connecting the pieces. Erin stayed in Boston longer than she'd originally planned. One Sunday morning, we sat on the back steps, drinking coffee. "You know," I said, "for years I thought the worst thing in this family was you and Alan not speaking." She looked at me. "And now?" "Now I think maybe you saw something I refused to see." Erin shook her head. "I didn't know he would do this, Dad. I just knew I couldn't trust him. You tried to tell me. You wanted your children to get along. There's nothing strange about that." We sat quietly after that. At 73, I'd spent most of my life believing structures failed because of one catastrophic weakness. Engineering taught me otherwise. Collapse usually begins with smaller compromises that go ignored until they connect. Families aren't so different. Alan's betrayal didn't begin with 11 drops on Thanksgiving. It began much earlier, when debt became secrecy, secrecy became entitlement, and entitlement allowed him to believe my right to control my own life was negotiable. I still own the brownstone. I still manage my investments. Dr. Hart jokes that my memory remains annoyingly good. But the thing I value most isn't the $4 million estate Alan tried to control. It's knowing exactly what I am worth to the people around me. Alan looked at me and eventually saw an estate. Erin looked at the same 73-year-old man and saw only one thing worth protecting: her father.